Hi pals! Welcome to another episode of Drew's Cues. Today we're going to talk about the ever-confusing numbers at the beginning of every song. The time signature. Here we go! Before we dive into this lesson, let's do a quick review of note values. You can find a video about that here. A couple of things that we haven't gone over yet, but there will be a video about those soon, are dotted notes and tied notes. And that video will eventually be right here. We will need to remember 4 specific note values and how they relate to each other. So here they are. First, the whole note looks like this. The duration of a whole note can be split into 2 equal notes, and those are called half notes and look like this. Each half note can be split into 2 equal notes that are called quarter notes, and they look like this. And each quarter can be split into 2 eighth notes, which look like this. Also, an important side note is that in some other countries, the names of these notes are actually based more on the original names. So, if you're watching from one of those other countries, a semibreve is a whole note, a minim is a half note, a crotchet is a quarter note, and a quaver is an eighth note. This will be very helpful knowledge later on. Okay, with all of that said, let's talk about time signatures. What is a time signature and where do we find it? A time signature is 2 numbers, one on top of the other, inside the staff. Those 2 numbers tell us how each measure is divided up. That is the meter of the song. It's found at the beginning of the first staff, right after the key signature. Or it may be found at the beginning of another measure if the meter changes. So what is the meter of the song and how does the time signature represent it? The time signature helps to tell us how many beats there are, how many pulses there are in each beat, and which note values represent those beats and pulses. There are 3 kinds of meter that we're going to take a look at: simple, compound, and complex. Today, we're going to focus primarily on simple meter and compound meter. So let's break all of that down before we build it all back up. And let's kind of start backwards. Let's start by talking about simple meter versus compound meter. We're going to leave complex meter for a later episode because it's kind of complex. When we're in a simple meter, each beat of the music is divided into 2 pulses. In a compound meter, each beat of the music is divided into 3 pulses. So, 4 beats of a simple meter will sound like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Whereas 4 beats of a compound meter will sound like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Using bars and stems, the difference looks like this: simple meter and compound meter. Now, let's look at the time signature again. There are 2 numbers, one on the top and one on the bottom. As we said earlier, this tells us how each measure is divided up. So, what does each number mean? The bottom number tells us which units we're going to use to define the length of a measure, and then the top number tells us how many of those units fit between 2 bars. We can't get a sense for how long something is without first understanding what units we're using. Like, if I said, a foot is 12 long, you would say, 12 what? Apples? Centimeters? Inches? The unit is inches, and 12 of them make up a foot. So in a time signature, the bottom number is the units, and it represents a note value. The top number tells us how many of those notes fit inside a measure. Now, this is where remembering the American names for the note values comes in handy. Let's represent the notes as the fractions that are their names. A whole note is 1 over 1. A half note is 1 over 2. A quarter note is 1 over 4, and an eighth note is 1 over 8. I hope you've done your fraction multiplication homework because this is where it gets fun. Let's look at the common time signature 4/4, and let's actually represent it as a fraction, 4 over 4. It is 4 quarters. The fraction is 4 quarters. The unit we are using to define the length of the measure is quarter notes, and we're saying that 4 of them fit inside a measure, like this. Let's look at another one. How about cut time, or 2/2? The fraction is 2 halves. The unit we're using to define this measure is half notes, and we're saying that there are 2 of them that fit inside a measure, like this. But wait! You may be scratching your head saying, doesn't that mean that they're the same length? Don't 2 half notes and 4 quarter notes take up the same amount of time? Sure, but just as I can say that a yard is made up of 3 feet or 36 inches, we can say that a whole note is made up of 2 halves or 4 quarters. Okay, but in music, why would you want to be able to do that? The short answer is to define the beat or the pulse of the music. Let's look at these time signatures again, and remember that the bottom number tells us the unit and the top number tells us how many of them fit in a measure. Another way to say that is that in simple time, the bottom number tells us what kind of note gets 1 strong beat, and the top number tells us how many beats fit in 1 measure. Here's what 4/4 or 2/2 sound like in the same tempo. 4/4 sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2/2 sounds like 1, 2, 1, 2. Notice that in both, the half notes would have the same length, but in 4/4, we feel all 4 beats, and in 2/2, we only feel 2. So, now that your head is swimming, let's do a quick review. There are 2 numbers in a time signature to represent the meter of the music. The bottom number tells us what unit we're using to define the length of a measure. In simple time, each of those units is 1 beat. The top number tells us how many of those units, or how many beats, fit into 1 measure. This is a good time for us to take a little break. If you're liking this content so far, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so that you can keep seeing videos as they come out. Now, let's keep going. If you're not sufficiently confused yet, let's get into compound meter. Because why not say that most of what I just told you will be completely changed? Remember that everything that we've talked about up until now has specifically applied to simple meter. But now, some things are going to cross over, but others are going to change as we talk about compound meter. Going back a few minutes, you'll remember I said that when we're in a simple meter, each beat of the music is divided into 2 pulses. In a compound meter, each beat of the music is divided into 3 pulses. So, if 2 beats in a simple meter look like this, 2 beats in a compound meter will look like this. The problem with using the strong beat as the unit of measurement in compound meter is that we don't have a way to represent a dotted rhythm as a simple fraction. So instead of defining the length of the measure with the beats as the units, we're going to use the smaller pulses as the units. Let's take an example where each measure has 2 big beats, and each big beat has 3 pulses. Let's use the dotted quarter note as the big beat. What then is the value of each pulse? An eighth note. So, for this compound meter, let's use 8 as the bottom number. How many eighth notes are there in each measure in this example? Well, 2 beats times 3 eighth notes gives us 6. So the time signature is 6/8. A 9/8 time signature means that each pulse is an eighth note and there are 9 of them. Or 3 beats of 3 eighth notes, or 3 dotted quarter notes. So the number of big beats in a compound meter is 1/3 of our top number, because there are 3 pulses per beat. Now, I know I just threw a big wrench in there, and some of you may be more confused than when you got here. My suggestion is that you watch this whole video again, at least once. Having heard it all once, it'll click more the second time. That said, let's wrap this up with one more rule to remember and a little bit of a review. Here's the rule. Simple meter can have 1, 2, 3, or 4 big beats. Compound meter can have 2, 3, or 4 big beats, which thus means that it can have 6, 9, or 12 small pulses in groups of 3. If the top number is 1, 2, 3, or 4, you know that you're in simple meter, and the bottom number is the unit of the big beat. And thus the top number, that 1, 2, 3, or 4, is the number of big beats in a measure. If the top number is 6, 9, or 12, then you know you're in compound meter. In that case, we know that the bottom number is the unit of the smaller pulses, and the top number is the number of pulses in a measure. Divide that number by 3, and you know how many big beats there are in the measure. Whew! Okay, I know that was a lot. If you understood this all right away, or you already got it and this was helpful for you, great! If you're not quite there yet, I invite you to watch this again, and you will get it eventually. Let me know in the comments below what you use to remember how time signatures work, and let me know if there's anything else you would really like for me to talk about. In an upcoming video, I will take these rules and show you how to turn it around and find the key signature based on a few measures of notes. This reverse engineering of sorts will probably also help you understand this a little bit better. If you enjoyed today's content, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so that you get notifications and don't miss anything in the future. Leave a comment below to let me know how I did, and as always, I'll see you next time.